Hey everybody, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at some new FIA regulations for 2025. You guys sent this in, and honestly I was a little bit surprised by some of the details.
Yeah.
So we're going to unpack this a little bit with our expert here.
Pretty wild stuff.
Yeah, so buckle up because we're about to take a closer look at how the FIA is changing the game when it comes to driver conduct. And let me tell you, the implications could be huge.
Oh yeah, they are definitely upping the ante this time. They're not just talking about fines. Now we're talking about the big guns, race bans, and even championship point deductions for what they deem misconduct.
Wow. Okay, so let's rewind a little bit. This all started with a little bit of a clash back in November 2024, right?
Yeah.
The Grand Prix Drivers Association, the GPDA, publicly questioned the FIA's rules around what they called inappropriate language. And the GPDA, they thought the rules were way too vague.
Yeah, they basically argued that, there's a world difference between, say, a driver cruising after a spin and a driver directing insults at another person. Context is key. They also weren't too thrilled with the fines that were already in place and some of the FIA's other rules about clothing, piercings, that sort of thing.
So essentially the GPDA, they drew a line in the sand, and the FIA's response was to draw a harder line.
Exactly. They basically doubled down. Not only are the fines staying, they're getting a serious boost. And they've added the possibility of actually suspending drivers from races and get this, taking away championship points for repeat offenders.
Whoa, okay, so this is serious now.
Right.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty here. What exactly do these new fines look like?
So the FIA has implemented a tiered system for fines across various racing series, but let's zoom in on Formula One since that's what we're talking about today. For F1 drivers, the fines for what the FIA deems misconduct could go as high as $180,000.
$180,000, are you kidding me? That's more than some drivers make in a year. I'm thinking about drivers like Yuki Tsunoda and Mick Schumacher's 2024 salaries. That would be a huge chunk of their earnings.
Yeah, and the FIA is claiming that this is all about transparency and consistency, but there's a bit of a disconnect there, They're bragging about these record profits while simultaneously dropping these massive fines on drivers. It feels almost like a punishment, wouldn't you say?
It definitely seems contradictory. It's like they're saying, look how well we're doing financially. Oh, and by the way, we're going to hit you with these massive fines.
Yeah.
But there's a bigger issue here, right? The very definition of misconduct is still super hazy.
Yeah, that's the crux of it. To understand what the FIA considers misconduct, we have to go straight to the source. Article 20 of the International Sporting Code says, and I quote, "The general use of language, written or verbal, gestures or signs that are offensive, insulting, rude, disrespectful, abusive, or that cause offense, humiliation, or are inappropriate." Quite a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah. So anything the FIA decides is inappropriate could land a driver in hot water. That seems incredibly subjective.
It does, doesn't it? It's almost like they're saying, we'll know it when we see it. Think back to Max Verstappen's inappropriate comment in Singapore. He ended up doing community service for that.
And under these new rules, that same comment could have cost him a fortune, especially if it wasn't a first-time offense. This situation feels like a slippery slope. Where does expressing frustration end and genuine offense begin? And who gets to decide?
Right. That's a question a lot of people are asking. And it gets even more complicated when you consider that the FIA is also cracking down on driver protests. They're making it clear that drivers can't protest a whole range of decisions made by officials.
So basically, the FIA is limiting drivers' ability to challenge calls they think are unfair. It just adds another layer to this power struggle between the drivers and the FIA.
Yeah, it's certainly adding fuel to the fire.
This whole driver conduct controversy feels connected to the other criticisms the FIA has been facing lately, don't you think? There have been a lot of issues around their handling of other racing series like the Dakar Rally and the World Rally Championship.
It's hard not to see a pattern emerging.
And amidst all this, FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem keeps saying that he needs more time to fix things. It's ironic, isn't it? Because these new regulations, the ones that are causing so much tension, seem to be a part of his grand plan to fix things.
It's certainly a bold strategy.
And maybe not a popular one. The BBC reported that quite a few people within the FIA actually disagree with these new regulations. There's internal pushback.
Oh, the plot thickens.
We haven't heard much from the drivers themselves about these new regulations, but I can't imagine they're happy about it. This could be the first volley in a much bigger battle between the drivers and the FIA.
Only time will tell, but one thing is for sure, these regulations raise some serious questions about the future of the sport.
We'll delve into those potential consequences right after we hear a word from our sponsors. So stick with us, and we'll explore how these regulations could impact everything from driver behavior to fan engagement.
It's fascinating, with these new regulations, the FIA might actually be discouraging young talent from even entering the sport.
Hmm, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that. If the penalties for even minor slip-ups are so severe, could Formula One start to seem less appealing to some of these rising stars?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. You're this young driver, loads of potential, but you're also known for speaking your mind, or showing your emotions. These new rules could make you think twice about joining Formula One, where one wrong word could cost you a small fortune.
Yeah, it could really change the personalities we see in the sport. Formula One's known for its passionate drivers, the ones who wear their heart on their sleeve. What happens if they're constantly worried about saying or doing the wrong thing? Will we lose some of that raw emotion?
Precisely think about some of the most memorable moments in Formula One history. A lot of them involve the drivers expressing themselves, whether it's joy after a win or frustration after a bad race. It gives us a glimpse into their personalities and makes them more relatable, more human. If drivers are constantly walking on eggshells, we might lose some of that spark.
Yeah, it's a trick or balance.
Hmm.
The FIA wants to maintain a certain level of decorum, but cracking down too hard could backfire and sterilize the sport. And let's not forget the fans. Yeah, millions of people around the world love Formula One for its drama and excitement.
Right. Do fans really want to see their favorite drivers penalized for, a few heated words in the heat of the moment? The FIA needs to think carefully about how these regulations might impact fan engagement and the overall entertainment value of the sport.
Yeah, it raises a lot of questions. How will drivers react to this increased scrutiny? Will they start to self-censor and become less expressive? Will we see fewer risky overtakes because drivers are too afraid of being penalized?
It's hard to say for sure, but the unintended consequences of these regulations could be huge, potentially changing the landscape of Formula One as we know it.
It's interesting how this situation kind of reflects this broader trend we're seeing in sports and society in general.
Yeah.
There's this growing debate about freedom of expression versus, the need for rules and control.
Oh, absolutely. It's a debate that's happening everywhere in politics, on social media, even in entertainment. It's a complex issue, with no easy answers. Where do we draw the line between protecting people and allowing them to express themselves freely?
Yeah, it's a discussion that's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
And it's one that the FIA is going to have to navigate carefully if they want to maintain order without sacrificing the soul of Formula One.
Yeah. This whole situation really highlights that even a sport as seemingly straightforward as racing is full of nuance and complexity. It's not just about who crosses the finish line first. It's about the values and the principles that shape the sport itself.
It definitely gives you a lot to think about. Speaking of things to think about, we have some uneasy stories about the FIA's management of other racing series that we want to get into.
Yeah.
But first, a quick message. Okay, so we talked about driver conduct and how these new FIA regulations could impact Formula One. But this isn't happening in a vacuum, right? The FIA has been facing criticism over its management of other racing series as well, and some of these stories are a little uneasy. Let's take the Dakar Rally, for example. The 2025 event was riddled with problems.
Oh, yeah. The 2025 Dakar was a bit of a mess. There were logistical nightmares and some really questionable officiating. Remember that whole debacle with the 48-hour stage? Threw a wrench in a lot of competitors' plans and really raised questions about fairness.
Yeah, and then there were the roadbook errors in Stage 7. Mistakes like that can completely change the outcome of a race. It makes you wonder if the FIA is really equipped to handle these massive, complex events.
It's definitely a cause for concern, and it's not just the Dakar. The World Rally Championship, the WRC, has been facing its own set of challenges lately.
The WRC has been struggling to stay relevant, hasn't it? Some people say the FIA hasn't done enough to address the rising costs and the lack of manufacturer involvement.
Exactly, and then you have all these whispers of problems in other series like Rallycross. It's starting to feel like a pattern.
It does make you wonder, is the FIA spread too thin? Are they trying to manage too many different series without giving each one the attention and the resources it needs?
It's a valid question, and with these new driver conduct regulations adding another layer of complexity, it's going to be very interesting to see how the FIA handles it all.
So the big takeaway here is that this controversy over driver conduct is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The FIA is facing criticism on multiple fronts.
Yeah, the FIA is at a crossroads. The decisions they make in the next few years will have a huge impact on the future of motorsports.
It's going to be fascinating to watch it all unfold. Will they address these concerns? Will they make changes, or will they double down on their current approach?
Only time will tell, but one thing is certain. This isn't the end of the story.
Well, that was quite a journey. We covered a lot of ground today, from the specifics of these new driver conduct regulations to their potential impact on Formula One and the wider context of FIA management. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Could these strict regulations backfire on the FIA? Could they actually end up discouraging young talent from entering motorsport or even stifle the personalities that make the sport so captivating?
That's the question we'll leave you with today. What do you think? And be sure to let us know down in the comments.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of motorsport.